Let's be real. Kids are freaking dumb. And I say that with all the love I have for my children in mind. But yeah, kids are dumbasses. And I'm not ashamed to say that I was one of the stupidest when I was a teenager. It's just not the whole boys will be boys kind of deal. I was the kind of guy who threw himself off a roof and into a pool during parties because people thought it would be rad. Never mind that I could have missed and split my head on the patio. But that isn't the worst of all things. I'll always remember this night of August where my friends and I went down to the hunter's trail in the woods near our neighborhood. It was at the very end of a dead end where older kids went to smoke weed in their cars. You just had to pass the 4 or 5 concrete blocks and follow the trail. There were a few hunters' cabins down there, some fresher than the others, but there was one that was rather moldy that was a fan favorite of our group because there was a stash of porn magazines. Mind you, I was 14 years old and it was the 80s. Access to porn wasn't as easy as it was today with the internet. If you wanted something like that at my age, you had to accidentally sneak a peek at your friend's sister showering in the bathroom, or have some dirty old porn mag you look over your friend's shoulder. I was an idiot, but I couldn't possibly bring them back home. First, the smell would have alerted my mom, seeing how these mags had been forgotten for a while in that old cabin. They just took in the smell of mold and wet wood. A suburban clean freak mom like mine would have found it in seconds, even if I were to bury it under fabric softener sheets. And second, the pages were all stained and discolored because of humidity. Some were stuck together and, well, I didn't really want to bring them back home. Going to the cabin with my friends was sort of an excuse to look at the porn. But being a horny teenager is not why I say I was a dumbass. I was a dumbass because when we went to the cabin and realized that it had been taken apart, instead of going back toward the beginning of the trail and squatting in another cabin, I decided to keep following the trail to see what I could find, and I dragged my friends with me. It was starting to get dark and one of them wanted to head back, but I wouldn't let him. He finally caved in and followed me until we found a new cabin, one we had never seen before. Not because we'd never gone this far, but because we probably just never saw it. It was off the trail a bit, so we had to carve our own way there. Matthew had his father's machete and was cutting through the branches. We all wanted to have the thing, but he said his father would be super mad if he knew anyone else was touching it. We were sure it was just an excuse because he didn't want to share the fun. But, well, it was his and we didn't argue much with him. Plus, Matthew was just taller and bigger than us. He was also a year older. He was the designated strongman of our team. Jake was the brain and I was the one who got us in all sorts of situations. So anyway, we walked toward that cabin and it's in terrible shape. You could see a hole in the metallic roof the size of a basketball. The aluminum was caved in like something just dropped from the sky at full speed and destroyed the roof. And I remember the way the aluminum was bent, in an almost perfect circle. But I also remember the smell as we approached it. It's a smell I'll never forget. Whenever I think about that night, I smell it as if I were there. This terrible, pungent smell of death and decay. Of rot and feces that boiled under an aluminum roof for all the summer. Jake wanted to turn back and put his arm in front of his nose, but again, I wouldn't just let him turn around. We climbed the stairs and watched for the steps, but Matthew's foot went through the patio as soon as we got on it. Half of the wood was moldy and wet, but a few planks still looked okay, so we stepped on those instead. Matt had a few scratches on his ankles, but he was overall okay enough to continue the exploration of the sordid cabin. And this is where I say again that kids are blissful, unaware idiots. We entered the cabin and were instantly enveloped by this god-awful stench. It felt like we had just entered a bubble of heat and humidity that hadn't been released in a long time. To say the air was stale was an understatement. But with a hole of that size in the roof, I truly wondered why it reeked so intensely. I heard Jake holding back his sickness behind me and chuckled, pretending it wasn't affecting me. But 5 seconds in and I already felt dizzy. It was nasty hot in there, but the smell was more than enough to have a grown man keel over in disgust. I was about to turn around when Matthew talked. "Hey, what's that?" Unbeknownst to me, he'd gotten a flashlight out of his banana bag and was flashing at something in the corner. It was dark and we couldn't see too well, so the flashlight was welcomed, until we actually saw what was in the corner. "Holy shit, that's a body!" Jay yelled and took a step back, like any reasonable person would do. I didn't. I took a step forward, stole the flashlight from Matthew's hand, and got closer to the thing. Yes, it was a body and it was somewhat human. At least that's what I thought. But it looked so decomposed and old it was hard to tell. The skin had grayed out, and what was left of the body's flesh looked like it was fused to the wall behind it. There was a hole in the skull that I thought was the forehead. The guy had been shot? His eyes were closed, and I say his because I couldn't see breasts on that naked, putrefied body. I was fascinated by it, even if Jake was saying something in the back about calling the police and all. And I decided to poke it, with the flashlight, on the thing's head. The creature's eyes opened, and they were the pitchest black I'd ever seen, with only a singular red ring in the middle, where there would be an iris. This time I took a step back. I took 10 even. Following my retreat, there was the highest, most strident noise I'd ever had the displeasure to hear. It was like a long complaint, but it sounded otherworldly, hellish even. This is the kind of sound you would expect horror movie demons to make as they would be doused in holy water and their skin would start melting. I felt it in the very marrow of my bones, and for a second, it felt like skeletal fingers were wrapped around my heart, ready to pull it out of my chest at any second. Now, the three of us started screaming in unison, and we all but dashed out of the house. I heard a loud cracking noise, and I saw that Matthew broke the patio. I turned around to go help him, but I saw the gray creature behind him and stopped dead in my tracks. My eyes trailed upon its ghastly form, detailing every protruding rib of its emaciated figure. I saw what looked like a demon's tail swish about it behind it too. There was another long screech that forced me to put my hands on my ears, and mixed in were Matthew's cries for help. I saw Matthew swing around that machete of his, but in his position, he couldn't even aim for the creature's feet. As soon as the creature was done screeching, I saw it unhinge its jaw. Matthew's cries were stopped instantly as the beast's maw clasped down on his neck. It tore into him as easily as if he were a mere piece of meat, just like chicken. His body trembled and spasmed for a couple of seconds before falling forward onto the patio. I saw the blood dripping from his open neck, and I wish I could say I heard myself scream, but I don't think I did. I was past beyond terror at this point, and all my screams died in my throat as I turned around to run. Jake was frozen in place, so I grabbed him by the collar and forced him to run with me. If that thing could eat Matthew's entire head in one bite, I didn't want to know what it would do to me or Jake. Now Jake was screaming. He was screaming so loudly that even if we were to run away to the end of the world, that thing would chase us and find us. I heard the sound of steps running after us and branches being cracked and stepped on as the creature kept running for us. We had a good bit of run before we would make it out of the woods and at least come to a road. I was an idiot and a jackass, but I was a healthy one. I was good at sports and I had good cardio. And Jake, well, not so much. He was more of a brain guy, remember? More of an Atari gamer and a comic book nerd. I could hear him pant loudly and I kept pulling him to go faster. But I knew he was at his limit. The thing screeched behind us again and Jake screamed not to let go and help him. So I tightened my grip on his wrist and tried to run even faster. But dragging his weight was slowing me down. I almost wanted to let go. But I didn't. That was until I heard a scream. I felt something warm splash on my back and felt the weight of Jake grow tenfold. I turned my head around and I saw that the ghoulish demon had stuck his entire arm through Jake's torso. I felt the blood soaking my shirt and sticking to my back as I stared at Jake's face. He breathed out a quiet, gargling, "Help me," under his breath as blood rushed out of his mouth and sprayed onto me again. And I saw the life fade from his gaze as the creature opened its mouth again. Its red rings never leaving me as it plunged its gnarly teeth into the tender skin of Jake's neck. And I saw the way the skin bent under the pressure, a microsecond before it tore and revealed more flesh and more blood. I let go of his hand, heard the crunch and the sound of swallowing, and then ran. I ran at a speed that I would hope would make Olympic racers proud, but fast enough that I thought it would be enough to escape this creature. I had my heart in my throat, fear in my soul, and a desire to survive so strong I prayed it would be enough to save me from the stupidity that made me poke the thing whilst it was laying dead on the floor. I wish I'd never been to the woods that night, and while my friends were dead, I was so terrified I couldn't even think about them, or the disgusting ways they were taken out. I could hear the sound of Matthew's head being gnawed right off of his neck, and the sound of Jake's flesh tearing apart in my eardrums, right next to my own frantic heartbeat and the creature's racing steps behind me. I could see the clearing that led to the concrete blocks, and then what I hoped was going to be the safety of civilization, and so I started screaming. I started screaming like my life depended on it, because it goddamn did. I screamed all of my tiny 14-year-old lungs out at maximum capacity, hoping that someone or anyone would come. Hopefully, someone with a shotgun and damn good aim. And then I felt something burn inside my leg. I fell face first into the ground as I realized something stabbed me in the leg, and soon enough, I was breaking my nails trying to claw at the ground. I remember the feeling of my tears as they started streaking down my face, and the "I don't want to die" screams. I probably pissed myself at this point too. I was going to be devoured. I could feel that stinky creature's breath and warmth getting closer to me. And then I heard a loud bang, and the shrillest, most terrifying screech I'd ever heard. I felt something warm and sticky on me. And then I heard another bang, and then another. And then two more, and a lot of screeches. I heard men's voices, and I was dragged again by the creature whose spade-shaped tail was embedded in my leg. I screamed and felt my heart rise in my throat as the pointy ends of its tail rubbed against my flesh and bones inside the wound. I heard another bang and a weaker screech, and another, and the sound of an axe. The pain in my leg was atrocious. I felt like I could pass out at any moment. I think I actually fainted when one of the men pulled that tail out of my leg. I heard Bible verses being whispered as they raised me up and carried me back to town. I woke up in the church, where there was a nun waving a sage branch around me and the smell of incense filled the room. I saw my reflection in the mirror near the bed, and one of my eyes was so blood-injected I couldn't see my sclera anymore. There were bandages on my hands and my legs, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore. When I lifted the covers, my foot was gone, and before I could cry out in horror, the nun laid me back down, raised from her seat, and went to fetch my parents and the priest. They told me they had to amputate my leg because the devil had taken root in it. I asked about my hands, and they told me I broke a couple of fingers clawing at the ground and lost a few of my nails. I asked about my eye, and he told me it was a result of infection of evil inside me. Now, I wish I could say I didn't believe him, but after running for my life from the ghoul and losing 2 friends to it, it didn't sound too unbelievable.